Hi everyone, I'm Les,
And I'm Ashley.
and you're listening to Anthropotamus, where we explore some of your favorite anthropology topics.
Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Anthropotamus. We're here today with Dr. Cara Ocobock and Dr. Sarah Lacy. Dr. Ocobock is professor of anthropology at the University of Notre Dame, whose research focuses on human biology and cold climate physiology. Dr. Lacy researches dental cavities and periodontal disease in Neanderthals and early modern humans. And we'll be discussing both their articles, two articles today, Woman the Hunter, the physiological evidence, and also the archaeological evidence. So thank you, both of you, for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Before we actually get into the article, could each of you tell us, what led you into anthropology and your interest in women as hunters, and what led you two to collaborate with each other?
Who wants to go first? Oh, okay. I just got the hand, so I guess it's me. So my origin and I guess story going into anthropology is a little bit of a depressing one, so I apologize off the bat to make everyone sad. In undergrad, I went to the University of Michigan. I know it's probably a massive conflict of interest to be at Notre Dame, having gone to the University of Michigan, but I was that kind of stereotypical pre-med undergrad. I took a couple of anthro classes here and there to fulfill various requirements for my undergraduate degree. But in my junior year of college, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and from diagnosis to death was 4 months. It was a really, really rapid decline, and one of those kind of catastrophic and formative experiences in my life. And once I had gotten on the other side of her passing, I kind of sat with myself and thought, what is it I really enjoy doing? Because the thought of going into medicine and dealing with people dying on a regular basis and, grief and all of that as a career sounded horrible, considering what I had just gone through and was still working through as, a 20-year-old kid. And I went back to the intro to anthropology. It was a 4-field course that I took my sophomore year, and that was a lot of fun. How about I take some more anthropology courses and just kind of see where things go? And I took a archaeology course and a human evolution course, and I just kind of fell in love with the human evolution aspect of things. And then from that point on, I took every single biological anthropology course you could imagine at the University of Michigan and decided to pursue my PhD. Though I went in wanting to work on orangutan biomechanics, which is the most far afield as you can imagine from what I do now. And that shifted to kind of human physiology in maybe my second year of graduate school. And it's kind of been that's been the path ever since. And I guess as for Woman the Hunter and the roles of women hunting, I come at it from 2 points of view. One is the personal and one is the educational. The personal one is I'm a former power lifter. And when I was at the University of Albany in Albany, New York, and it was in a pretty powerlifting heavy gym. Everything revolved around the big 3, and it was a toxic environment. And the comments I got from men at the gym about what women's capabilities were, and maybe I should stop lifting because my boobs would shrink and I should be more careful, all of these insane comments, that got me thinking about women's physiological abilities and performance in different styles of exercise. And then when it came to the anthropological aspect of it, though that is arguably anthropological too, it started actually here at Notre Dame a little bit more when we do fossil hominins in my class. I have my students as an assignment make an online dating profile for the fossil hominin of their choice, which is the most hilarious assignment ever. And I adore it and will never get rid of it. But the first time I ran it, every single student did their profile from the perspective of a man. It didn't matter how the student identified in any way, shape, or form. All of the fossil hominins, they were men fossil hominin online dating profiles. And that just got me wondering, what the hell is going on? Why are the students automatically gravitating to the male perspective? And it comes to a lot of the historical things that Sarah and I write about in these articles, is that a lot of human evolution has been written by men from the perspective of men and the role that men played in our evolutionary trajectory. And so that got me interested in kind of the physiological side of things, as well as how we represent and reconstruct our evolutionary past.
Oh, that's such a nice connecting, overarching narrative. From my perspective, I actually just always wanted to be an anthropologist. Like my parents have artwork I made in third grade, Egyptology, terribly misspelled, but like I kind of always known that that's what I wanted to do, which is why I'm always surprised when my students don't know what anthropology is. But when I was applying for college, my parents were like, "Oh, well, we thought you were always gonna like move on from this and get into something where you could actually get a job." And so I was doing economics in college, but secretly also taking anthropology classes. And once my mother took a new job, where she was actually hiring archaeologists my junior year, she was like, "Oh, I didn't know, like there's actually a lot of work for archaeologists." And I'm like, "I've been secretly double majoring the whole time." Uh, and then got out of college in 2008 with the economy imploding and thought, I think I'm going to go pursue this further. I think this is the time to go get a PhD. And, like Cara, I came in doing something totally different. I wanted to study Homo erectus energetics because I thought that was like a really sexy topic at the time, and ended up studying Neanderthals. But I had actually taken a class my senior year in undergrad on the anthropology of sex and reproduction. And this class like blew my mind. And I was even considering like going to midwifery school if I did not get into graduate school. And so I didn't have to activate that plan B, but I still had all those interests. And so in grad school, I actually got trained as a doula. I was, a doula for undergraduate students in my grad program. I was even involved in a project with a professor who was both a gynecologist and an anthropologist interested in birth in chimpanzees, because in St. Louis, the zoo there had taken some of the chimpanzees off of birth control. And so I was like, oh my gosh, if we could actually get good documentation, video them delivering, so much of this evidence is anecdotal, and it would be great to actually have a study following pregnancy, delivery, and labor for chimpanzees. So those chimpanzees have very weird behaviors, and though they were off birth control, none of them got pregnant because they were all hand reared and had some interesting problems being sexually attracted to other chimpanzees. So that didn't happen, but that has continued to inform a lot of my interests. So even though I'm like studying Neanderthal oral and now hopefully respiratory health, I'm still interested in like, what does that mean for life for these people? What was it like for them? And, often it loops back to these questions about like, what was it like to give birth for them? What was it like to be a woman in the Paleolithic? And so Cara and I are coming from it from these two different places and different expertise, but it was this really logical place and where we intersected. And we've been talking about this for a while. And she's working on a book on like women and evolution. And so it was like, oh, this is a great time for us to like explore where our interests overlap, because we had already written a paper together on Neanderthal cold adaptation that we thought was really great. We really enjoyed the experience of working together. And so we were excited to try another topic.
Those are two very awesome stories. So how did you two end up collaborating for this article?
Well, we went to the same graduate program. So we had actually just been friends throughout graduate school and stayed friends, so we're texting about like, just like BS in the discipline. And then, it'll turn into, oh, well, like, have you seen this paper? Or, it's both a friendship and an academic relationship.
And I would also say, I think one day I was complaining to Sarah that I felt woefully inadequate writing this book, and, lots of imposter syndrome coming through. And she had this wonderful idea of, hey, let's actually write a paper so that like you have your foot in the door with this, at least academically. And I thought I kind of put it on hold, I think, for a little bit until we came to having to submit abstracts for the American Association of Biological Anthropologists. And I think I texted Sarah at one point, like, hey, you want to do paired talks for the AABAs? And so we did the Woman, the Hunter paired talks, which then led to the manuscripts and articles that you see today.
Was that at the last AABAs?
Previous. So 2021. I think it was the first time back in person post-COVID.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I went to that one.
Denver.
No, I was definitely not at Denver. I was in Reno though. Darn it, I missed it. Sound like it would have been really interesting though. I went to Aspen instead. So moving on to start easing our way into the article. So, beginning in the early years of anthropology, we have this view of man the hunter, very masculine image, really that kind of like created this strict view of division and labor between men and women. Can you explain how that image has evolved over the years?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah. So part of where this idea comes from is like hunter-gatherer studies. Like there's this analogy to people who are living foragers today, and there's not that many forager populations still around. And some of the ones that are heavily studied have a division where males do the majority of the hunting. And so from that data point, you had people just extrapolating that, oh, well, if that's how it's happening today, it's how it must have been in the past. Also, it's predominantly male researchers coming into this, coming from these, very what we consider traditional, but obviously not as so traditional as to be Paleolithic ideas about gender roles. And so they just were like kind of the de facto assumption of what was applied to the past. And you had this snowballing of theories coming out of it that like, oh, but male hunting then allowed them to show off to females. It allowed the increase in brain size. And it just became like this lodestar that like everything comes out of male driven hunting, and no one was really questioning that assumption.
Yeah, I'll piggyback a little bit, and hopefully this won't cut into any other questions. That, yeah, there were all these ideas that it was hunting is the reason humans are the way they are today, and it's only men doing the hunting, therefore evolution only acted upon the males, and females are these passive beneficiaries. When likely, given that females are kind of the choke point when it comes to evolutionary forces, because they are the ones that give birth, that kind of thing is just kind of shoved aside, and that everything is man the hunter. And there was this amazing, feminist questioning and pushback against these theories in the 70s and the 80s in particular. And the last time there's been that big push was the 80s. So that's over 40 years ago. And in that intervening 40 years, there's been a whole slew of new archaeological evidence out that shows that females were hunting, and there's no reason to think that they weren't hunting. But also there's been a whole lot of biological evidence, physiological evidence to show that females aren't these physically frail, fragile individuals that couldn't have hunted because of their physical inferiority. That kind of data just didn't exist in the 70s and 80s. And so we are not here to say that feminist work didn't exist. It is absolutely foundational, and it is why we are here today and able to do what we are able to do. We just wanted to update the story because a lot has happened since then.
You mentioned evidence that has arisen over the past few decades. Can you give examples of evidence that show that women have, both in archaeological record and ethnographic research, that do show that women do participate in hunting activities?
Well, I'll take the archaeological and give Cara the ethnographic. So archaeologically, right, when we look at early humans, looking at pathology, repetitive use, all sorts of things, they're doing the same things. So if males are hunting, then females are hunting because they have all the same trauma patterns on their bodies, right? Like in Neanderthals. There are some differences that appear in early modern humans in the Upper Paleolithic, like slightly higher rates of thrower's elbow in males. It doesn't mean females don't have thrower's elbows, but it is more common in males. But if we also we're anthropologists, so let's look at the cultural milieu that's happening at that time. They're also innovating all sorts of new tools at that time. Bow and arrow, the atlatl, fishing hooks, fishing nets, all these things come out of this time period. So it's also possible that you are seeing less strain on the body because of the innovation of these new kinds of hunting techniques at that same time. So from my perspective, if males are hunting, then females are also hunting. But there actually are a few sites that very solidify this idea of female hunters. Like the site in Peru where you have multiple women buried with hunting implements, making it like very clear, like this was something that belonged to this individual in life. And when we look at burial uh, goods in Europe, for instance, I mean, that's my specialty, so I'm a little bit biased towards Europe. There's no differences in the grave goods between male and female burials, even in the Upper Paleolithic.
So as far as like hunting in general goes, and just thinking about the what it would take to survive in that sort of environment, it seems like from a logical standpoint, you would have to have everybody contributing, right? It wouldn't just, and as somebody who's actually, done a bit of study on how to forage properly and other things like that, like there's not, I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there, but there's not enough to really justify saying that somebody would only do that, or half the population would only gather. That doesn't make sense, especially how difficult it is to hunt with, modern equipment, much less something that you made with your own hands.
Yeah.
And we make that argument.
Yeah, like exactly. Yesterday I do hunting with my students in my fundamentals of bioanth class, and I have this big Home Depot lawn unicorn that got wrapped in fur to look like a woolly rhinoceros. And I go and I take, an atlatl, traditional bow and arrow, slings, and a spear, and they all get to try their hand at hunting. And for one, they're all terrible at it. It's absolutely terrible. That this is a skill that needs to be learned, and anyone can learn it. And as the students get more practice with it, you see absolutely no differentiation between the females in class and males in the class in skill acquisition for hunting. But yeah, that's the argument we make. They lived in such small populations. There's no way people could have specialized, because it needed to be, as we talked about in another interview, all hands on deck.
I think you also mentioned this, but I mean, to put it in perspective, hunting tools like spears, bows, atlatls, all of those are force multipliers, which means the total amount of force you start with doesn't predetermine whether or not you're able to use it. I mean, if you've learned the skill.
Yeah, exactly. It is very, very skill based, and it's also very specific skill based. So this will go back to the students hunting, like with the atlatl. I had several baseball pitchers in class the first time I ran this, and they came out thinking that they were going to kill it, and they were terrible. They might have been the worst ones, maybe because they came in with that false sense of confidence. And so that's also another really good example of the skills of today can't necessarily tell you how well somebody would have been at something for the skills of the past, since a lot of people use baseball pitchers today to try to understand the evolution of human throwing. It's very context dependent and specific.
Yeah, I mean, baseball is like just trying to. I'm not good at baseball. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I don't know what I'm doing with that, but what I can say is that just the just like your basic pitch has a lot of different technique going into it. I can imagine that trying to coordinate that specific skill to an entirely different skill, some things might transfer, like the total physical strength, maybe. But again, it's like you said before in the article, uh, they're using tools, right? A baseball is, you're throwing, it's I guess closer to throwing a rock, but I don't know. I see that as a bit of a difference there.
Prehistoric curveball, the prehistoric slider. I know, I want somebody to do that study. Ashley, do you want me to go back to the ethnographic part? Yeah. All right.
Oh, yeah, I forgot where we were at.
That's okay. So I'll keep short on this because, biological anthropologists, my ethnographic skills and understanding are limited for sure, but I can rely on the work of others that has been done well. And so we do have modern hunter-gatherers where females are hunters. We see this with the Aka, we see this with the Agta, Trobriand Islanders. There are a couple of Australian groups as well. Females hunt. Females will be specify is not the right word. Specialize is the right word. They will specialize in fishing and all of these things. So you do see variation. It is true that today, across modern hunter-gatherers, males are more often the hunters. They are predominantly the hunters across human hunter-gatherers today. But again, hunter-gatherers today are not truly representative of hunter-gatherers in the past. They are not fossils frozen in time. They've been evolving the past 2 million years like everyone else. And so we always have to be careful with that interpretation. And then recent work from Cara Walsheffler's lab came out examining an ethnographic database looking for all ethnographies that explicitly mention hunting and who is doing the hunting, which of course drastically shrinks down the number of ethnographies they can work with, because not all of them are that explicit in what they talk about. And within the ones that they found, which I think was like 65 or so different populations, they found 80% of them where females were hunting. And so this is pretty strong evidence that it's not as uncommon as we like to think. And we cannot throw it out as this idea that females hunting was incredibly rare. That doesn't seem to be the truth of the matter, and that we should be going into our reconstructions of the past with the null hypothesis of no extreme sexual division of labor, and have the evidence show us that there is one if it is present.
Can you briefly explain? So, in the physiological evidence, right, we talk about the difference between men and women. Can you explain the physiological differences of men and women that have been used to suggest that women were not hunters, and then what evidence shows that that would support them as being hunters?
Mm-hmm. So I'm very honest about this, that there are on average differences between, if we do a strict binary of females and males, there are on average differences that would give male an advantage in things like power and strength. Males typically have more muscle mass, and especially that's in the upper body. And so if you're imagining hunting taking place with throwing implements or anything in which upper body strength is truly, truly necessary, males would have that advantage. And also we see it, like, all the online comments of like, oh, let me just show you marathon times of males versus females to disprove your argument. Like, yeah, sure. Male marathon times these days are about on average 10 minutes faster than female marathon times. But let's make 2 points about that. One, as Sarah and I were texting back and forth, how biologically meaningful in a hunt situation would that 10 minutes actually be when we talk about persistence hunting, which is just long wearing down of an animal? And 2, let's keep in mind that the vast, and I mean vast majority of research done in exercise physiology, looking at training, nutrition, recovery, all of those things that go into like perfecting and optimizing an athlete, all of that research, almost all, has been done on males. And then they just scale it down to females and they treat them like smaller males. And that's just not how that's going to work. So I think we are really far off from optimizing, quote unquote, if you will, female athletic performance. And I wouldn't be surprised that if things get closer and closer, the gap between the sex-based gap actually gets more narrow as we get better research and actually figuring out the best way to train females for various events. And so, yes, absolutely, males they are larger body size, more upper body strength, and that could potentially be really important. Females, however, seem to be more metabolically suited for endurance activities. So things that don't require a lot of power and strength, but you can keep a low intensity activity going for a very long period of time. Females are more fatigue resistant. And part of that is female bodies typically burn more fats than carbohydrates. You get more calories from fats, and it's a slower metabolic process, which means more consistent energy is provided over a longer period of time. And this is in addition to different muscle fiber types, where females tend to have more of the endurance type 1 fibers, male have more of the like powerlifting, as I call it, type 2 fibers. And so females seem to be better suited for endurance activity. And that endurance activity is really what would have been important for the persistence style hunting we believe to have been taking place early on in human evolution, that they would have just run and worn down the animal before giving the final killing blow, which if an animal is worn out, you don't need anywhere near as much upper body strength as you would need if the animal were up and running and ready to go. Females have also been documented ethnographically of carrying heavy loads twice their weight over extremely long distances. And so again, there's all this setup of females had the ability to carry out these different tasks and potentially may have had an advantage in some cases with endurance relative to males. But the most important point is that there is absolutely no biological evidence to suggest that females were physically inferior to the point of not being able to take part in these hunts. They would have been just as capable of doing it, perhaps using different techniques, but they were highly capable hunters. And we see this with the fossil record with like Neanderthals, as I'm sure Sarah will talk about in a little bit, with injury rates in hunting.
And can I just add to that, like talking about sexual size dimorphism, like, because as someone who teaches forensic anthropology, for instance, it is like very biased towards Europeans. So European populations have some of the most sexual size dimorphism of any population, closer to 15%, but it's many populations in the world, it's more like 8%. So a lot of people commenting like men are so much bigger than females, and you can tell a male skeleton so much more easily apart from a female skeleton, all these things. But like that, that does not hold true across populations of outside of Europe.
And even still, human sexual size dimorphism is not that big. We are not hugely sexually dimorphic.
Yeah, I mean, even then, like 15% is the max, basically. For me.
Comment on that. I always think it's funny when people say that because my husband's smaller than me. But reading about women's endurance and body strength, it reminded me of when I was pregnant and I was going through, baby class, and they commented saying that a woman being pregnant is like us walking up a mountain every day. And I always think of that, about us having to carry that weight all the time.
So this is actually something I'm exploring as well, of thinking that bipedalism may have unlocked endurance capacities that were already in place due to the physiological changes associated with pregnancy. So a lot of the changes that come with all of the metabolic things that happen during pregnancy mirror what we see when somebody trains for an endurance event. And so I would not be surprised that this is something I'm working on with a colleague to try to explore a little bit more. But I think pregnancy could have had a huge effect on those endurance capacities that would not have really come out until we became striding bipeds.
So you do mention in the physiological evidence article that there isn't really much research done on women athletes. I mean, what research would you like to see done?
One, I would just like to see massive cohorts of females being put through the exact same studies that males have, just trying to reach some level of equality of looking at the data to get the numbers that we need. And then I think a second one is there's been, and this is not so much relating to this paper, but this is just my own personal thing, there are two others here, is one, current work on the impact of the menstrual cycle on female performance is really terrible. They often don't measure hormones because it's expensive and it's invasive. So I get it. Like, I get why it's a problem, but they will make assumptions that every female is on a 28-day cycle. And so they'll ask, when was, the first day of your last period? And they assume a 28-day cycle and then assume the hormone levels based on that. And so you honestly have no clue how a menstrual cycle is impacting physical performance, because you don't actually have data on where an individual is at in said menstrual cycle. And then the other thing I would like to see is a whole lot more attention paid to estrogen and the effects that it has on everybody's body, no matter the sex. I think a lack of estrogen is incompatible with life. We see a fair amount relative of androgen insensitivity disorder. That is far more common than estrogen insensitivity disorder. And there have only been 3 documented cases of estrogen insensitivity disorder that I know. And that's related to only one estrogen receptor, which is not even an important one. And those people still have pretty terrible health issues. So I would love to see a lot more research done on estrogen in general, but also its effects on athletic performances. Some people are starting to use it as a performance enhancing drug. Yeah.
Les, do you have any more comments before we move on, or questions?
I did, but I completely lost them. Every time you talk, I just get engrossed, and yeah, I lost them.
Thank
And
you.
Yeah, so not right now.
I had one for Lacy and I forgot it too. I got to start like writing things down during these shows. Uh, I'm sure it'll come to me like when we're finished. Um, so since these articles have come out, have you guys received any criticism? And how would you like to respond to that?
I mean, yes. Academic papers, really not so much. Like we got really, really positive responses. So many really lovely emails from colleagues, like, so glad you did this. Can't wait to assign this in a class. Messages from grad student groups saying like, oh, we read this in our reading circle, loved it, really positive. But the Scientific American piece, I think a lot of people, they see a headline, they don't read the piece, and they're coming into it with a lot of assumptions about gender roles, right? That kind of reinforce their worldview. So there was a lot of negative comments on the Twitter post from Scientific American, uh, mostly to the effect of like, we don't know what we're talking about, or these sort of like maybe these gotchas, like, but you didn't consider this. But most of the gotchas were things that were actually covered in the American Anthropologist paper. Things like, well, what about cave art? And it's like, well, we talk about it, and no, there are no images of male hunting in cave art. Things like that. We did, really try to engage the people who were critiquing, who had like legitimate questions where we could answer that. Not so much on Twitter because that's, kind of a cesspool. But with students or people who emailed us directly with, non-aggressive and genuine questions, trying to engage that. But I think a lot of the critique from people is mostly just that they feel like their intuition about how life was like in the past somehow must trump our doctorate degrees.
Yeah, I've gotten some hate mail. Quite so you all know, I am the sole reason there are women firefighters, and that's apparently destroying the profession. I have that amount of power, just so you all know. Those are the kinds of emails you do not respond to. Yeah, so it's been hectic. It's a bit wearing and it's a bit exhausting, I won't lie. But part of me feels like, you're doing good work when you get some reactions, and I wish people were more amenable to actually having a discourse than just being like, you're a cretin and you're an idiot, and that's not any sort of constructive criticism whatsoever. And a big part of what we're trying to do right now, so I emailed American Anthropologist this morning to see if we can get the 2 American Anthropologist pieces to be open access for just like a month. Because it's behind a paywall right now. And so people who are criticizing that, oh, you left out A, B, and C, they're all in the papers, but they're papers they can't read because they don't have access to them. So we're really hoping that we can get open access to that, at least for a little while, so then we can re-promote alongside the Scientific American article and give people an opportunity to see the argument in full.
I'm not gonna lie, as much as I have, you know, tried to make myself see things from every perspective, there is always that little twinge in the back of your mind when you see something that affects. Well, let me just rephrase. As a man, reading that men, you aren't the only thing in the universe that matters. It gives, I know it gives you a visceral reaction. It's like you have to slow down and think. But I mean, at the same time, like you said, there's a paywall. So there's always that excuse. I don't have access to it. I don't need to care about it, you know? Um, if you do get open access for that, I would very much like to know about that so we can promote it for you.
Couple things I remembered I wanted to discuss about. We didn't get to discuss tool making, because you do discuss that in the article and how we always think, oh, men are making their tools. Well, why wouldn't women be able to make these tools also? It would make sense. Women are going to need tools also to get, even if they were just gathering, which they probably were not, they still need to know how to make tools to do their tasks. And And then
Yeah,
I
we
forgot the other
argue,
thing
but
again.
we argue both sides of that, right? Like, one, we have no way of knowing who was the flint napper, right? Who made the tool? Maybe that'll change in the future because there was that article earlier this year arguing that they found traces of female DNA on a pendant. But I mean, that doesn't tell us necessarily who made it, just like who wore it, potentially whoever really had last contact with it. But maybe there's going to be some future techniques that would allow that to be unlocked. But until then, right, we don't know who the makers are. And there's kind of this funny uh, conflict in the way people talk about it, because they talk about the flint napper as consistently masculine, but then say that behaviors like processing leather is a domestic activity that women would have done. But it requires stone tools to do that. So are they arguing that women like get men to make processing tools for them, and can't sharpen and refine their own pieces? Like, it seems incredibly unlikely. So even if you want to hold to this whole like domestic sphere as the sphere of women thing, it still requires that women can flip now. So I think we need to really just like challenge ourselves with the language that we use around stone tools, and recognize that it's like a heavily masculinized language, and that it's not appropriate. We don't have the data to back it up, and it's kind of just silly.
As a small note on that, it just seems like there's a bit of a flawed logic in saying that flint napping would be a masculine thing, even given the like the social structure that we're assuming. I mean, just consider the nature of the work. It's small and very, very detailed. When we're talking about hunters and in the male context, I mean, I don't generally think about that as you're working on this tiny little thing. It's more of the idea of you're going out there and you're going to kill the thing. Uh, I think the only reason that it's an assumption, or the assumption that it's a male task, is that it's a weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just what it seems like to me. Like it's breaking its own logic in claiming that it's a specifically male task.
We actually like leave a little breadcrumb for a future graduate student, suggesting like, wouldn't it be a great topic to look at like the preponderance of images of hunting tools, description links of hunting tools relative to processing tools in archaeological pieces? It's like a master's project, right? But maybe some student will pick up that call.
I noticed it.
Yeah, it's one of those things of just like there's always this elevation, and we talk about it in the paper, of meat eating and then the implements used to get said meat. When honestly, the plant material and other things that could be picked up without weapons or obtained without weapons made up the vast majority of the calories our ancestors were eating. But there's always this glorification of meat and the hunt.
That also reminded me of something a question or a thought that I had while reading it. Is just like how many men out there hate eating fruit or nuts or anything like that?
The Liver
I
King.
Exactly.
We've
It's like,
got an N of one, the Liver King.
I know for a fact that I've seen several men eat grapes. So
No,
I know,
that's
right?
a lie. I don't believe that one bit. That doesn't fit my worldview.
Only meat.
Before we have to wrap this up, something else I wanted to mention was you do bring up this idea that women having to breastfeed and take care of the children, an excuse not to go out. I mean, really, nobody really probably wants to go hunting when you have to breastfeed every other hour. That sounds exhausting. I think every ounce of breast milk, you're burning like 20 calories. So can you imagine how many calories are you burning in a day and then having to go out? I get it, been there. But once you pass that period, or you just want to get away from your child, either one, I don't know. Really, there's still other individuals like the child's grandmother, and what is it, the grandmother hypothesis or whatever it's called, right? You have other people there to help take care of your children. So, to me, it's not a very good argument for why women can't go out and hunt.
Yeah, there's the grandmother hypothesis, and as we talked about in our interview earlier today, Sarah, like the communal childcare is something very uniquely within our lineage. But again, this is another thing that pregnancy and even lactation are not these debilitating periods in a woman's life. And they had to keep doing what they were doing to survive as well. We see this across mammals, that female mammals can't just stop everything because they're pregnant or that they're lactating. They still have to get the food they need to eat. And I mean, one of the wonderful human examples of this is that example of Sophie Power, who ran, the ultra marathon 3 months after giving birth, which means she was training for the ultra marathon while heavily pregnant and before. And she was still lactating while running that ultra marathon and fully capable of doing so. And so the idea that these periods of a woman's life would be debilitating for her physical activity is I'll just say it, bullshit.
Well, last week in the New York Times, right? Did you guys see the article about a woman she's a runner and she's continuing to run while pregnant, and all the negative comments she gets from people out, how dare you be out running in the state of pregnancy?
I mean, even when I had just given birth and I was breastfeeding, I mean, I was back, I know Les doesn't like bringing up where he works because he still works there, but I don't work there anymore. So, oh well. But, I was loading big rig trucks. Average size of the package was 40 pounds a package, but his average weight is 40 pounds a package. We're supposed to be loading 300 packages an hour, 300 to 400 packages an hour. I was still loading the trucks. I was probably, and breastfeeding every other hour. So, I mean, we're not as delicate as people like to think we are.
I mean, I hate to just throw another random comment in, but I'm going to anyway. As far as the pregnant woman running a marathon, I've never once run a marathon, and I consider myself a pretty fit guy. I it's just not going to happen. But so
these people are the extremes, right? They are the extremes.
There's a reason I chose lifting over running.
and I've done some lifting too, and that, you know what, I wasn't that great. Like, I was okay. I have good form, but I was not dedicated enough. And you know what? Anybody who is very impressive. Same thing for the marathon thing. As somebody who is fairly fit, even in much later in life than I actually imagined I would be. Yeah, no, it boggles my mind that people will do that to themselves voluntarily.
Yeah. Their survival doesn't depend on it.
I have not done a marathon. I have done several half marathons, but I think 13.1 miles is as far as I will go.
I did a 5K once and I jogged it.
I did a 5K last month.
5Ks if they have obstacle courses, because I find running so boring that there need to be things to entertain me along the way.
Oh man. Okay.
I did run over a bridge.
Oh.
That was
That's impressive.
Yeah.
That changes all of it now.
I know, right? It's a real competition.
Oh, I guess you have a meeting you need to go to, so we'll start wrapping this up. So what is next for you guys? What research do you plan on doing next?
So I've got the book, which is it's titled, what is it titled? That's What She Said, The Story of Hugh Woman Evolution. I've got that level of sense of humor, everybody. And the full draft is due in January with Princeton University Press. But I also received over the summer an NSF grant to continue my work in Finland with the reindeer herders there to look at cold climate adaptations, as well as the impact of climate change on health.
We will keep us updated, and we would definitely like to have you back on the show to review that book.
Awesome.
It's been
I'm still excavating,
pleasure.
so yeah, I'm still excavating in Macedonia every summer. I have a baby due in February, but I still plan to be back in the field with 4-month-old. just as I was in the trenches this summer pregnant. And
that doesn't fit my worldview, Sarah. You can't possibly be pregnant and carry on with your life.
Just crawl out of a 2-meter deep trench, vomit in a bush, and get back in there, which did happen. So continuing that, and then hoping to apply for some grants to look at respiratory health, do some preliminary, methodology testing before actually applying it to the fossil record, and then, Cara and I keep coming up with new ideas for things we want to work on together, because now I'm at a R1 institution and I actually get time to not just think about the things that I think are cool, but actually, put pen to paper.
You guys sound like you have a lot of fun things going on right now.
Yeah, it's just been a lot. It's trying to prioritize everything is not the easiest of tasks, but hey, it's the work we love to do.
Les, before we wrap this up, do you have anything else to say?
I was just going to say it's been a genuine pleasure reading your article and talking to both of you.
Thank you
Thanks
both
for
so
having
much.
us.
Well, thank you for being on the show. For those watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
All right. Thank you all so much. I'm going to jet off to my next thing. So
Thank you all for listening. Distribution of Anthropotamus is in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. Please continue to follow us on Instagram and Twitter @Anthropotamus for our latest episodes, show notes, and book discussion schedule.